In this lesson, we'll develop a way to submit a class to a database with all the needed information, like the class name, description, code, teachers, and even a class banner, all of it using React Hook Form and Zod. So create a new route component right here within Classroom Frontend under Source, Pages, and create a new folder right within it called Classes, and create a new file called list.tsx, which will render a list of all the classes. You can run RAFCE to quickly spin it up, and it'll work in a similar way as with listing the subjects. Then we can create a new route component under classes, but this time it'll be create.tsx, and you can also run RAFCE. This is going to be responsible for rendering a form through which we'll create a new class. Now we need to define the class routes and use these components within app.tsx. So right here, where we have the resources, dashboard, and subjects, now we will also have classes. So I will duplicate the subjects right below, and I will rename all the instances to classes, as well as a label of classes with an icon of graduation cap. There we go. So now we have it here, and we'll also add it as a new route by duplicating the subjects. And this route will be for classes. It'll render the classes list, so we can import it right here. And there's going to be the classes create. Both of these will be coming from the pages we just created, so we have to import them properly at the top. Similar to what we have done with the subjects list and subjects create, now we can import classes list and classes create coming from classes list and classes create. Perfect. Now, if you head back over to localhost 5173, check out classes right here on the sidebar, and there's a list. If you modify the URL to go to 5173 classes create, you'll be navigated to the create page. Stay on that page, and later on we'll add a button on the class list page that takes us to the creation page. Now within source lib, within it create a new file called schema.ts. Within the schema, we can define a Zod schema to validate form inputs and make sure that the user is submitting the right form. So export const a new faculty schema, which is going to be equal to z.object, and the faculty will have a name of a type z.string. Now z, of course, is coming from Zod, so make sure to import it. You can say import asterisk as z from Zod, and then .min, it'll have a minimum of 2 characters. If you want, you can also provide an additional message if that condition is not met, such as name must be at least 2 characters. And then we can continue adding fields, such as the email, which is going to be z.string.email. Then we'll also have a role, and this is going to be an enum, which means one of the predefined options, maybe like an admin or a teacher or a student. Then we'll have a department, which is going to be of a type string, not deparation, but department. After that, we'll also have an image of a type z.string, and this one will be optional. And finally, an image CLD, Cloudinary, pub ID, as in where it'll be published. And this will also be optional, the same way that the image is. Now, we'll also have a couple more schemas that we'll use throughout this application for subjects, schedules, classes, and so on. Just so we don't have to write them by hand, I'll provide them to you within the video kit link down in the description, so simply copy it and paste it here. You'll notice that we have the schema for enrollments, for the classes, schedules, subjects, and the faculty schema we just created. And now we're ready to develop the form that'll allow us to create classes. Since we're working on the front end, I can bring back the browser so we can see the changes that we're making live. And let's start with JSX. I'll wrap it in a create view. This is a special component coming from Refine with a class name set to class-view. Within it, we'll render breadcrumbs coming from refine UI breadcrumb, just so we know where we are. An h1 that'll have a class name set to page-title, and it'll say create a class. Below it, I'll render a div that'll have a class name set to intro-row, and within it a p tag that'll say provide the required information below to add a class. I mean, it makes sense, right? Then I'll render a button. This one will be coming from components UI button. On click, we simply want to go back. So I'll render a callback function and I'll call the back method. But for that to work, we have to use the use back functionality or use back hook coming from refine dev core. To initialize it, you can just say back is equal to use back, and then we can call it within this function. If you're calling it without any params, then you can just define it like this without using a callback function. And this button will just say go back. So if you save it, you can see it. And then if you go from, for example, classes to create, then you'll be able to go back to the page you came from. Of course, this is supposed to say back, not use back. We'll test it out later on. And I don't really like this primary color. So what do you say that we change it one more time? You can head over to tweak CN. And this time, let's go with, let me click through it until I find something that I like. Let's go with Vercel. Why not? It's very plain, but it'll do for now. I'll expand it a bit, take the code, and we can head over into our app.css, and I'll replace the last three. Root, dark, and theme inline. And we get new ones right here. Within a matter of seconds, we have a new theme, which I definitely prefer. Now we can head below this div that's wrapping the button and create a separator coming from components UI separator. Below it, another div that'll have a class name set to margin y of 4, my4, flex, and items-center, and within it, we want to render a new card component. Not a car, but a card. This card will be coming from UI card. It'll have a class name set to class-form-card, and within it, we'll render a card header that'll have a class name set to relative with a z index of 10, and within it, we'll render a card title that'll say the text of fill out the form, and it'll have a class name set to text-2xl, padding bottom of 0, and font-bold. Below the card title and the card header, we can render another separator, and below the separator, render the card content that'll have a class name set to margin top of 7. This is how it looks like 100% zoomed in, but looks like I was zoomed in a bit more. And right within it, we can render a form. This is going to be a classic React hook form. So what do you say that we simply find it within ShatCN by searching for ShatCN, do a Command K, and search for a form. It'll simply say that forms are tricky, but they're one of the most common things you'll build within a web application. So thankfully here, they provide us with an anatomy of a form and a complete example. So let's go ahead and follow the example that they provide because we are using React hook form here. So first things first, we have to make this component rendered on the client side. Oh no, I forgot. We are working with React, so this is going to work right off the bat. We just need to import Z from Zod and then define a form schema, which in this case we have already defined in a special file. Then we have to define the form itself by importing the Zod resolver and use form coming from React hook form. So get those two. Then define the form right at the top of our component. Let's make sure that you properly copy it. Const form is equal to use form. I'll remove the types from here. And specifically, we need to define the resolver that is resolving in a class schema. We have created it before, so you just need to import it. And then we can define the default values. In this case, it'll just have a status of active. And we'll also provide a special prop of refine core props, which will be resource of classes and an action of create. This will let refine know exactly what we want to do with that form, and it'll handle the rest. Then we can define an onSubmit function. So let's define it right here below. And it looks like our resolver is complaining a bit. We'll look into that very soon. For now, we can define our onSubmit. That's going to be const onSubmit is equal to an arrow function. Let's also import Zod. That's going to be import everything as Z from Zod. And the type of schema is going to be class schema, coming from libschema.ts. Then we need to open up the function block. And for now, we can console log the values. I'll also apply a try and catch block. Within catch, we will simply console log the error by saying console log. This error is coming from error creating new classes. And here we can just console log the values. Once we have that, we can bring in all the imports needed to create a form. I'll bring them right here. A button we already have, and we can delete the form that we imported before. It's going to be coming from components UI form. And then finally, we can copy that form and use it right here within JSX. It's form where we spread out the form information. Then we have an onSubmit that calls handle submit with the onSubmit function, a class name of space-y-5. As a matter of fact, you can immediately see this demo form that we just imported, but we'll modify it a bit by creating a new div right here within this form with a class name set to space-y-3. And within it, I'll render a label coming from components UI label. And within it, we'll say banner image with a span that's going to say asterisk, which means that it is necessary, mandatory, with a class name of text-orange-600. There we go. So banner image is needed. And then below it, I'll render a p tag that'll say upload image widget. Very soon, we'll add an upload image widget coming directly from Cloudinary, my personal choice for asset management when developing any kind of applications. Now, below this div, we can render our first form field that'll render the control. This control will be coming from the form. So right above the onSubmit, we can destructure the handle submit, the form state, specifically the is submitting state from it, as well as the control. And this is going to be coming from the form like this. So now when you say form.handle submit, it's just enough to say handle submit without specifying the form. And same thing here, we're just passing the control. We can give it a name of name. And then we're rendering a form item with a label of class name. And again, if you want to, you can add the same span element that we created here. That signifies that it is required. The form control will remain an input with a placeholder of something like introduction to biology. That's a demo name for a class, like section A. And then in this case, we won't be needing the form description, but rather just leave the form message and call it a day. So now we have the placeholder for the banner image, which we're going to upload soon, and the first input for the class name. Below this input, we can render a div that'll have a class name set to grid. On small devices, grid-calls-2 with a gap of 4, and we can start adding more inputs right within it. So I'll start by duplicating this form field and pasting it within this new div that we just created. This div will have a name of subject ID. It'll render the form item that'll say subject. It'll also be required. And instead of rendering an input, we want to render a select component within form control. So simply render a select coming from components UI select with an on value change equal to a callback function where we accept the value, and then we call the field dot on change and pass in the value, but first we convert it into a number because this is going to be for the ID. And then we can define the value itself also within the select by making it equal to field dot value dot toString so we can properly display it. Within the select, we can render a form control. So actually form control is supposed to go within the select, and then we'll render a select trigger, how we'll open the select coming from components with a class name set to w-full. There we go. So you can click it in the full width, and then finally a select value right within it. Damn, we are indented all the way to the right side of the screen. We're losing space. So I'll do a select value right here coming from components UI select. That'll be self-closing, and it'll have a placeholder equal to select subject. There we go. And finally, now we have to map over the example subjects that we can go over. So let's go ahead and create some dummy data for the subjects and the teachers. Later on, we'll fetch real values from the backend in the upcoming lessons, but for now, we can generate some fake ones. We'll do it right here below the onSubmit, and we can actually ask Junie to generate it for us. I'll say something like create 2 arrays, one for teachers, the other for subjects. Each one can have a couple of objects. Teachers only need an ID and a name, and subjects need an ID, which is a number, a name, and a code, which is same as name, but all uppercased and shortened. I think this should be enough for Junie to generate it, and it should be able to do so within seconds. It wants to take a look at this file. I mean, I didn't really tell it to do it in this file, so it'll most likely create a new mock data file, but then it should import it here as we want to use it here. There we go. It's trying to see whether data points like these already exist, so it does it properly. But in this case, we really don't want it to be anything special. There we go. It looks like it added them directly within the constants. So that is under constants, index.ts. And there we go. We have teachers and subjects. For now, we can just copy this and keep it within the same component directly below the form, because later on we'll remove it anyway. So I'll simply collapse it. It needs to look something like this. And then we'll do the same thing for the teachers. Perfect. And now directly within the select, we can map over those subjects. But that's going to be happening below the form control within select content. So make sure to import it, and within it, map over subjects by saying subjects.map, where we get each individual subject, and for each one, return a select item component that's going to have a value of subject.id.toString and a key. We have to have a key since we're mapping over it of subject.id. And you can open up the component right here, and within it, we can render subject.name as well as in parentheses, the subject.code. That's going to look something like this. When you click on it, you'll see mathematics, math, computer science, CS, physics, and chemistry with their names and codes. Okay, now let's head a bit below. We're going to go below this form field all the way here, and we will create a new form field below. It's also going to be a select. So I'll go ahead and copy this entire select form field right here, and I will paste it right below, still within the same div. But this time, instead of subject IDs, it's going to be talking about the teachers. So it's going to be a teacher ID. It's going to say teacher right here. Then it'll say select a teacher. And under select control, we will simply map over the teachers. There we go. And we can render just a teacher name. So that's going to be teachers.map, where we get each individual teacher. And we will make all of this teacher.id without rendering its code. So now you can see different teachers. If you expand this a bit, you'll notice that it'll look much better on larger devices. Like even on a smaller one, if I'm not super zoomed in, like I am right here, the two of them are going to fit in a single row. Now, there are a couple more inputs that we need to write, but as you can see, this is getting pretty overwhelming as we have went all the way to the end of the indentation. Maybe my code is a bit too large, or at least the font size is. So instead of writing it all by hand, I'll provide the other form fields, as it's mostly just repeating stuff, in the video kit link down in the description. So you can delete the entire component or the entire file and override the one which you can copy. Once you paste it, you'll notice that we will have added a couple of additional form fields, which will result in a page that looks something like this. We have a form where soon enough we'll be able to upload images as well to it, but for now we can enter a class name. We can choose a subject related to that class, select a teacher, a capacity for the class, as well as the status of the class and a description. And if you miss filling out some important fields like the class name or selecting a teacher, and you tried submitting before that, you'll notice that our Zod validation is working and it's giving us errors on all of these fields. Now, in the next lesson, we'll implement Cloudinary to allow users to upload images to the cloud and store them so that we can later on pass them into the backend and store them into our own database while not taking any space from it, as they'll be stored in Cloudinary and they'll just give us the optimized versions of the files that our users upload. So let's do that next.